So let's talk about cities. Pretty much all cities are made up of houses, but how you build those houses differs from place to place. You can stack mud and hay, or mortar together bricks, or engineer soaring glass towers. And it's the same for languages. Even though they all use similar building blocks, there's lots of different ways to link things up. And today we're going to bat around the topic of how exactly languages do it. I'm Moti Lieberman, and this is the Ling Space.
Welcome to the Ling Space.
So in an earlier episode, we defined a morpheme as the smallest pairing between sound and meaning. Some words are morphemes on their own, like bat, and some words are composed of more than one morpheme, like the compound noun bat cave or the plural bats. Morphemes come in a few different flavors, most importantly roots, which are like the big gravity magnet of meaning, and affixes, which just glom onto the root. So in bats, the root is bat and the affix is su, a morpheme meaning plural in English. And as we've also talked about before, affixes come in three different types. Prefixes, which come before the root, infixes, which get stuck in the middle of it, and suffixes, which go after. So those are the basic building blocks of morphology, but if a language is a city, then words are its houses and morphemes are the bricks that make them up. And just like in architecture, there's no one way of doing things. So how you treat affixes can be really different from one language to another. Some languages use some kind of affix repellent and end up with no affixes at all, like Vietnamese or Lao. These are called isolating languages, and so if you want to say something like, he discards the books in Lao, you end up with something like this. Man, dim, boom. That leaves out the tense and the plural marker on book. So the derivational bits, those parts of language that deal with tense or gender or number, those aren't there at all. But some isolating languages are fine with marking your tenses and numbers so long as they're separate words. Take Vietnamese for example. It's not that you can't have a progressive morpheme in the language, so something that tells you that whatever action you're talking about is ongoing. It's that the morpheme has to stand on its own, not attached to the verb. So take something like Tim dong nói or Tim is talking. The middle morpheme dong is what tells you that the talking just keeps happening, and it's totally independent. But let's say that you do like affixes. Great, so there's a couple of different ways that you can collect them. Maybe you want to string them together into easily identifiable little pouches, where each affix is responsible for exactly one grammatical concept. This is called agglutinative morphology, and one language that follows this way of building words is Turkish. So in Turkish, the verb eat is ye. So if I want to say that you singular ate something in the past, I'd say yedin. But if all of you ate, you get yediniz. You didn't eat becomes yemedin, and you all didn't eat is yemediniz. And you can just keep piling up morphemes this way at the end of the word in Turkish. As long as you have something to say that you have suffixes for, you can just keep the chain going. So let's say that you don't want people to know that you could quickly do something that would let you live forever if you wanted. Then you should say, which means behaving as if you are among those who we could not hastily cause to become immortal. And we can break that down into the individual meaning bits. So, ölüm is death, süz is without, leş is become, etc. They all have their own meaning, and then you can just stack them up to build up your morpheme tower. But your morphological architecture isn't limited to just matching one affix to one meaning. You can slim your words down a bit by crushing lots of meanings into each morpheme. Systems that go this route have fusional morphology, where affixes can carry a bunch of simultaneous grammatical roles. Like, let's take a look at Latin, where the present tense for investigate changes its ending depending on who's doing the snooping. If I'm the ace detective, then I'd say investigo. But if it's you, then it's investigas, and if it's somebody else, then they investigat. A verb ending like o encodes a lot of different information at the same time. It tells you that the person doing the investigating is speaking for themselves, since it's first person singular, but it also gives you present tense and indicative mood, all in just one little sound. But before you think it's only cool ancient languages that do this, just listen to the way I'm talking now. That's right, English is fusional too, at least some of the time. The thing is, English has a fairly puny morphological system. When you or I investigate, nothing special happens. But when he investigates, a multi-purpose utility S comes into play. It marks person, number, and tense, like in Latin, and you can't break it up into three, unlike Turkish. There's no he investigates. There's another way to stick affixes on your words too. Instead of putting them in the middle, beginning, or end, you can weave them through and through. Those are called transfixes, and they make you think about the boundaries of words a bit differently. Transfixes show up most often in Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic. For example, let's look at what happens with the Hebrew verb to chase. That's just which doesn't show up on its own, and you can't even really pronounce. To get the infinitive to chase, we need to hold down that verb root and then space the affix in and around it, like lirdof. So the bit that means to is just the o. And we can find lots of affixes like this. I chased, that's gadafti. So the transfix here is ti. He will chase, that's yirdof. So the affix here is yi-o. When we stack one morpheme on top of another, like in our earlier example with Turkish, and then we read them all in a row right off the pile, that's known as concatenation. But languages that use a lot of transfixes have what's known as non-concatenative morphology. We can't get the sounds for the different morphemes apart, everything's stuck together. Since there's no orderly row of morphemes, there's no concatenation, so non-concatenative. But there's different ways for your morphology to be non-concatenative. Anytime when you're not actually sticking morphemes together, that's what you're getting. So in English, most plurals take a suffix, so usually su like bat and bats, but sometimes other things like un for ox and oxen. But some irregular plurals like goose and geese, or past tenses like sing and sang, don't involve piling up morphemes on top of each other. Instead, they change something inside of the word. This is another kind of non-concatenative morphology, known as apophony or ablaut. You can also see apophony in German, where it shows up a lot for plurals. So you might have just one Fledermaus sitting around in your cave, but you're more likely to have a whole bunch of Fledermäuse. And finally, you have polysynthetic languages, where a whole sentence's worth of meaning can be expressed as a single unit. These are the opposite of isolating languages, where you have no affixes and every morpheme is free to be its own word. Here, all the morphemes get bound up together into a single super meaningful word. For example, let's take a look at Dena'ina, a Dene language spoken in Alaska. In Dena'ina, if you wanted to say they kicked me, that'd be shkiztail, all one word. The sh is me, the q is they, and iztail is kick. If they kicked you instead, then you just change that first marker, so nkiztail. But maybe you want a larger example. Okay, so here's one from another polysynthetic language, Yupik, spoken in Siberia and Alaska. In Yupik, the word kaipial ruliniok means the two of them were apparently really hungry. You can split that word up into its component bits. Kaig, piar, ru, lini, u, and ku. That's hungry, then really, then past, apparently, indicative, and those two. All different morphemes, all one word. If you think about the way we've defined our different terms today, you might notice something interesting. There are different ways of describing morphological systems, but they're not all mutually exclusive. Some of them are opposites, so your language can't be both agglutinative and fusional, because either your morphemes mean more than one thing, or they don't. And same with isolating and polysynthetic. Either all of your morphemes stand free, or they all get bound up together into one word. But you can match across these categories. So you can have polysynthetic languages that are agglutinative and ones that are fusional. These categories don't have anything to do with polysyntheticness. We just saw from our examples with Yupik that it's agglutinating. All of those morphemes that lined up meant just one thing. But you can have fusional ones too, like Seneca, spoken in Western New York. The Seneca sentence, "it surprised me," is made out of 6 morphemes like this: wa, wak, rif, a, nehrako, and o. But when you put them together into a word to pronounce, some of the morphemes undergo fusion, and you end up with this: agi, wanago. So there are a lot of different ways we can characterize how morphological systems work. We can define them by how many morphemes they string up together, or how much meaning they manage to fuse into a single unit. We can watch how they weave together bits of meaning until we can barely even see the seams. And we can shift around the sounds in our words to create new kinds of meaning. But no matter what architecture you use, you can build a beautiful linguistic city. So we've reached the end of the Ling space for this week. If you enmeshed my morphemes with your brain, you learned that languages differ in whether they isolate their morphemes or tie them together in little polysynthetic bundles. That languages also vary in whether they allow morphemes to mean more than one thing at a time, and that some meaning changes are done non-concatenatively with sound changes and transfixes. So we've got a couple of announcements for you all today before the credits. We've got a new store with all kinds of awesome stuff like t-shirts, mugs, and posters. There's a link down in the description below. Also, our director Adele and I are going to be at VidCon starting tomorrow. We'd really like to meet you guys, so if you see us, come say hi. We can make all sorts of interesting IPA noises at you and chat about linguistics. Hope to see you there. The Ling Space is produced by me, Moti Lieberman. It's directed by Delelise Prévost, and it's written by both of us. Our editor is Georges Coulombe, our production assistant is Stéphane Hurtebise, our music is by Shane Turner, and our graphics team is Atelier Muse. We're down in the comments below, or you can bring the discussion back over to our website where we'll have some extra material on this topic. Check us out on Tumblr, Twitter, and Facebook, and if you want to keep expanding your own personal Ling space, please subscribe. And we'll see you next Wednesday. Huil!